Evening and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. I'm your host, Carol, as you guys know. We have Selvi, we have the beautiful Soraya, and today we have a special guest. We have Ramani Muttetuagama, who said yes at very short notice. Thank you, Ramani, for joining us. And of course, today's topic is on silent activism. So, today is also the 28th episode of Wisdom Wednesdays. And I want to thank everybody who joins us week after week, to listen to our wisdom, as we call it. So, silent activism. And the reason I got into activism is one, my parents, they were very outgoing and they did a lot of social service. And they always saw injustice and called it out where they saw it. And so as a child growing up, I also believed in this injustice. And I use this phrase that was used, this quote by Edmund Burke, which says, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. And I really, really believe it. I believe that if you ignore injustices out there in whatever shape or form, then you too become culpable. And you cannot say, I didn't know. You cannot say, what can I do? There's so many forms of activism. And if you can't engage and you don't have the time to engage, you can support somebody else who engages. So there's that part of it, So I think sometimes people find it easy to not do anything and hope the problem will go away. So I believe, that's why I believe if you do not fight for injustice or stand up for the justice, then you too are culpable. You too become part of the problem. And then now I want to hand over to Selvi, who's going to tell you all about silent activism. And we are going to have discussions amongst ourselves about what activism is and what silent activism is. And one more story before I go to Selvi. What I learned from my parents, I think I passed on to my children. I was driving one day and I see an elephant who's been brought in for a perahara, exhausted by the university grounds. And my two kids, they're like 7 and 8 or 7 and 9 in the back of the car. And my older son starts yelling, Mom, stop the car, the elephant is crying. And, there was wet patches on the elephant's face. And my son says to me, you have to call that mahout and tell him to stop poking him right now, or that you're going to call the cops. So you can see at that age, he had a sense of what was right and wrong. And then another day, there was a lorry full of logs going by. And my younger son says to me, Mom, stop that lorry, put the car in front of the lorry, and get him to stop and take him to the police station because he's cutting trees. So, I mean, this is kids at a very young age. So that's also kind of calling out injustice when you see it, right? And I think why we activists engage is because we want the greater good. It's for the greater good. It's not for our personal benefit. We have nothing to gain from this activism except to see some wrongs righted. So on that, let's go to Selvi. Selvi, tell us all about silent activism, please.
Thank you, Carol. You gave us a good start. But before I go into it, I just noticed that we are not on Facebook.
Yes, there is a technical issue, Selvi. We are recording it, so it will be posted on Facebook when we are done.
All right, thank you. Okay, so activism and silent activism. See, what is activism? Activism is a set of actions that are put in place to effect a desired change in society. We want a change, we want something to happen, and it is not happening. So all the actions that we put in there to make it happen is activism. It is not a change in your private life or circumstances. We're not talking about that. Change, it is a change for the larger humanity, for a country or for the globe. These activists falls into many categories. But the most commonly recognized form of activism is direct activism. What is direct activism? Is what you can see. You can see it happening, like direct action to achieve economic, political, and social goals. It can involve supporting a particular cause or a range of causes or opposing it. Activism uses direct and continued actions. It's not just that you go on a protest march one day, and that cannot be called activism, and you cannot be called an activist. What is continuous on the same theme is an activism and an activist. A person who engages in activism can be called an activist. The word activist implies that such actions are taken consistently, that the activist is consistently active in their activism. For example, protesting in the form of activism, but someone who attends one protest probably wouldn't be called an activist. Now, activism uses direct actions such as protests, lawsuits. So in this activism scenario, lawyers have a great contribution to make. That's why I'm so pleased that Ramani is here today. Such protests, such as protest, lawsuits, lobbying. See, lobbying is also activism. Petitions, strikes. These are all part of activist programs. Now, we have had several activism which have been very, very high profiled and has happened over a long time. One of them is gender activism, which is actually some people fighting for feminism, starting from the suffragettes. And I must say, it's been happening over a century, and there has been ample progress made by the feminists who have gone through so much. They have suffered, they have lost out, they have sacrificed, but there has been a lot of progress, and women are enjoying the fruits of that progress today. But we still have a long way to go. It's not the end of the road at the moment. Second one is the political activism. These are all direct activism. That is nuclear protests. It's a worldwide, global phenomena. People opposing against nuclear threats and of ocean pollution and killing of the whales, and all of these are direct activism. Then we have human rights activism, like Arab Springs example. Now, there is also non-violent activism. Non-violent activism is also direct activism because it's out there on the street, and you can see that people are making a statement about protesting non-violently. Example of people who did a lot of non-violent activism is Gandhi, Mandela, Martin Luther King, to say a few names. But majority of the people do not have the wherewithal or the courage to take direct action. See, this is where we come in. That is, sometimes it's impossible to take direct action because there's a definite threat to your life, to your property, to your family. So you can't take direct action. People need courage to do that. And if you are isolated, or if you're the only person who's doing it, you can be easily targeted and victimized. So in those kind of situations, it is quite acceptable that they do not engage in direct activism. Now, more often than not, there could be threats to life and property. We know for sure how many journalists have been killed for journalistic activism in this country, which of course is direct activism. But what happens to these people who are not active because of certain constraints that they have? Because the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and the cruelty by the bad people, but the silence of the good people. Now, Carol also made the same point. And in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. That is what will hurt us more, because we know the enemies for what they are. But when the silence of the friends or our people whom we trusted is the one that hurts you even more, our lives begin to end the day we keep silent about things that matter. This is what Martin Luther King said. So, how do we engage these people for their own sake? These people who are silent, they have to be engaged for their own sake, because they feel much better if they participate. They feel much better if they can contribute. So, when we are looking at silent activism, what are the ways in which we can do silent activism? People can be mobilized into activism by just being themselves, being aware, but that they feel they're working for a cause and act as responsive citizens is very important for them as well as the community. We don't want people to sit around and do nothing when there are important, urgent things going on. But in whatever way they can, like Carol was saying, they can at least support some direct activists if they can't do anything else. Because ultimate measure of a man is not where or he stands in the moment of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at the times of challenge and controversy. This is the actual measure of a person, right? I mean, when everything is happy, you are standing there, it doesn't mean much. But when the things are going wrong, if you stand there and if you give a shoulder to people who are fighting, then that's the measure of you as a person who can contribute to society. First and foremost, for this thing to happen, to have silent activism, what is the thing that you need to do? First of all, you have to be aware of the injustice in society happening around you. See, most people, if you ask, they're not aware of it. Even when they see it happening, they can't recognize it because they get used to it. Now, Carol's son pointed out the elephant and the logs in the truck, because he has been made aware of the issues concerning the injustice of what happens to the animals as well as the nature, and he was able to immediately respond. See, that is the kind of response that we need from people who are silent activists. Just there, when it happens, just stop it. Being aware is very, very important. And this is where the spiritual activism comes into place. This can be meted out to people of the same community or another. If you see injustice and say, okay, this is not my community, it is somebody else's community. He's a Hindu, I don't care what happens. He's a Muslim, I don't care what happens because I'm a Buddhist. No, injustice is an injustice, whether it is to Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, or whoever. So when an injustice happens, if you can just sit up and say, stop it, don't do it. So this is what it means by silent activism, right? Now, it could be, even animals or the forest, to the nature, water, sky, everything can be affected, and we need to see that we act immediately and stop it. If you can see a water tap running along the road, you can get down and close that tap so that the water is not wasted. See, that is silent activism, where you are aware and you are acting at that point wherever you are. And it is always, please remember, don't think, oh, it's not my time to do it. I have to do this. I have to go to school, so I can't get down and close the tap. No, the time is always right to do what is right. This is silent activism, to be understanding that time is always right to do what is right. and to see the whole place, the nature, the animals, people, the communities, the religions, the languages, everything is extension of yourself. So anything happening to anything in your presence, you must stand up and say, okay, let me see what I can do. Second thing is mastering their energies for the well-being for the affected people, to do whatever is within your reach is important. To assert this awareness and spreading of energy or well-being in everyday situations, to think beyond the limited selfish needs of and desires of yourself. See, as soon as you stop thinking about yourself, about your needs, about your desires, about your thinking, about your emotions, then immediately you become aware of the rest of the people and the community around. So once another thing that is important is people who are silent activists, they say, oh my God, we did that, we did this, but what happened? We all got beaten up. Why go there now? See, that sense of failure is a third thing that we need to look at. Because Martin Luther King says a very important thing. I believe that unarmed truth and uncontrolled conditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. You did something, it became a failure, it doesn't matter. But it is still triumphant over evil, although it is temporary. So that is so important that you do it. Doesn't matter if it fails, but you just do it. Now, the other thing is the types of silent activism. I'll quickly finish with it. Holistic activism recognizes that the traditional forms of activism are reactive in the way that they mostly tackle the symptoms of deeper issues. It is important to peel the onion back a layer and tackle those deeper issues while also tackling the symptoms. Now, second thing is electoral activism. Voting for the right candidate. See what he has done or she has done and vote for the right person. Refuse bribes to do votes. This is so important. If you want to be a silent activist, don't take bribes, don't take biryanis, and don't take bottles of araks. You do what you think is right to the right person. Respond to real issues and not vote on linguistic, religious, and caste biases. You have to vote for economic issues, not because he's a Tamil, he's my caste, he's my language, it's my religion. No, you have to vote on real issues.
Selvi?
Yes.
Selvi, yeah. I can we, if you don't mind, can we wind up this one, because I want to go to Ramani soon.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly, I'll go finish the environmental activism, which Carol is very familiar with. Protecting our environment through everyday actions. Right. Sport and athlete activism. We've seen so much of it in the past, where you don't play with countries that do human rights violations. And also, Kumar Sangakkara is a very good example of silent activists through sports and athlete activism, where he, championed the use of facilities for other communities who don't have facilities in cricket. Consumer activism is the most important, the most effective. What you don't buy dies. So if you want to kill a company that does bad things, don't buy their things. Consumer activism is so important. It also, you can adopt minimalism. Stop buying things which you don't need. And you don't buy things because of greed, envy, or copycat responses. And you can change the world if you change your consumer practice. Spiritual activism, I won't say much. I think Tenzin will say a lot about it.
Tenzin might talk about that, Selvi.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think let's go to...
That's about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Soraya, do you mind introducing Ramani to our audience?
I
think she's worthy of being introduced.
I would love to do that. But before that, the breadth of knowledge and the wisdom Sylvie brings is invaluable to us. She has touched on many things which I am going to just awareness of the injustice, support the direct activists, and don't think it's not your time. So this is what Wisdom Wednesdays is about. We want to have women in every nook and corner waking up to this giant of injustice and doing something about it. If we were to sum it up, it is to say you walk up to the river, you saw the river is dirty, you're going to clean that river and then get across. So that is our hope and wish at the Wisdom Wednesdays when we spend every other Wednesday with you. And it is my deep joy and pleasure now to introduce Ramani Muttetwegama. I think I know her deeper, and we have to get to know each other deeper. So she is a lawyer. She's a managing partner of Tiruchelvam Associates, where she concentrates on the right to work, and she's an expert on communication regulation. She was also a member of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, she says, for a brief period. And talking to us on personal journey into activism and her thoughts on why people should engage. Please welcome Ramani Muttetwegama. Ramani?
Rama? Yes. Sorry, we can't hear you. Can you put your mic on? Turn your mic on. Ramani, I'm going to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself?
She's unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ramani, go ahead. No, she's still muted.
Let's see now. Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, so those were my headphones. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Selvi. I really enjoyed listening to your variety of ways in which one can be an activist. Because this is always the question, who am I? I'm not very important. I'm not very educated, blah, blah, blah. Where is the space for me to act? And as you rightly pointed out, as all of you know, acting is possible at any moment, anywhere, by anyone. So I have my own favorite ideas of how people are silent activists and some not so silent activists. My favorite ever story has been told to me when I was a little kid about how, during the independence struggle, there were all these parties that were banned and many of them were arrested. They lived in India. They needed to communicate with each other. And there were people who took the messages across. Now, most of those people were actually members of the prosecuting teams of the groups that were banned and stuff like that. But they did their little thing very quietly, moved around, taking the messages around. Similarly, I remember someone once telling me, I think during the coup, I said there was some man who was also suspected of being involved in the coup, and he turned up in their house and said, the police is coming to arrest me. And he said, I put him in my attic. So I said, oh, you supported the coup. He said, no, I don't support the coup. Those fellows were idiots. But that doesn't mean the police can just go around arresting people. I believe in that part of it. So that's another way of looking at activism. Another of my personal favorite stories is, at the beginning of the open economy, when we first opened the free trade zone, trade union activism inside the free trade zone in Katunayaka was basically not legally prohibited, but totally impossible. And then there was a famous strike. And that was famous because it was very effective. But what happened, of course, lovely, the employers just stopped paying the workers who were on strike. And they were hungry, they were tired, their families were hungry. And one of the men I know owned a company that produced soft drinks. And his sister was a very politically active woman, but he was not. But when he heard that these people were just sitting around outside the free trade zone, in the factory, just waiting without anything to eat or drink, he decided to send in all these lorries of soft drinks. And he said, you drink and you sell, you drink and you sell, you make enough money to pay for today, and then tomorrow we'll sort out whatever you're striking about. Now, those are for me examples of silent, not direct activism. This is not a man who would ever strike. He owned the company, a company. I mean, that other guy told me I didn't even believe in the coup. And those other people, their job was to prosecute the wrongdoer. But that doesn't stop you from doing the right thing when it's necessary. That's all it's all about. So, of course, I am a lawyer. Lawyers are not very good at this silent activism business. We normally take things head on. And sometimes we can get confused about what is it that we are being active. So, for instance, why do we study law? What is the purpose of my professional training? What is it that I promise to do? And that's where it becomes interesting, because I always promise, my promise is to ensure justice. That's my job. So if a man comes to me and says, everyone knows me, I don't like rape, I work a lot with people who have experienced rape and sexual abuse. But if a man comes to me and says, I've been accused of rape, can you represent me? Now, my first reaction is, frankly, piss off, because I want to tell them I don't give a damn whether you rape someone or not. That's not my job. There are plenty of people out there who represent you. But I have to keep in mind, someone is accused, they're going to be tried, and justice will be done. Once you come into the criminal justice system, you also deserve to be represented in court. So I've learned so much in learning to set aside my personal prejudices, my personal ideology, and just do my job to represent each person when they come to me and say, this is what I'm accused of. And remember that that's my job. My job is just to represent the person, not to subvert the truth or to insult the person who's complained or the defendant or anything like that. My job is to just make sure everything is done right, so that if there is a conviction, in this particular case, everyone knows all the case was done right. No one can say, oh, he had a bad counsel. That's how they won the case. He didn't really rape nobody. So that's the type of thing I think of when I think, what can lawyers do? Recently, I'll say this because I've said it out publicly before. I came across one of the most disturbing things that I could have seen as a lawyer. There was a civil riot, you might remember, after the 2019 bombings in the north central provinces. A lot of Muslim homes were attacked. A lot of Muslim-owned businesses were destroyed. And the police went around, rounded up, used CCTV footage, various things, and rounded up a whole bunch of people who they thought were responsible for these activities and produced them before the magistrate. Now, what happened at that time is that in that particular courthouse, the lawyers, who by the way were mainly Sinhalese, but anyway, that's important in a way, they stood up and they threatened the police officer and said, how dare you do this? And I was thinking, you don't have to do that. You can all sign up to represent these accused. You didn't have to stand up to intimidate the police officer. That is not silent activism. So what can a lawyer do as a silent activist? Do your job. Make sure that when you are in court and you see some woman who's sitting around clearly without a representative trying to get her maintenance, please don't ignore her just because she hasn't paid you fees. Walk up to her and say, excuse me, ma'am, are you doing okay? Do you need help? Are you ashamed? Are you too shy to speak for yourself? Let me just speak for you and get you the cash that your former husband was due to pay anyway. When you see someone who's in a neighborhood dispute where someone is poor and someone is rich, just volunteer the knowledge that nobody can shift someone else's boundary without buying their property. These are small things. Volunteer your knowledge, volunteer your services, and don't block. As I said, by what that particular body, don't get into that type of activity. I mean, at one level, these are small things, but this is where I think if you were to think from a silent activist point of view and a lawyer, that's where I think we can start. Okay, I'm going to stop because I like to hear everyone and I like to have a chat.
So Ramani, thank you so much. I'm going to put you on the spot and let Selvi and Venerable Tenzin or Soraya ask you some questions. Please go ahead, guys.
Yes, so Ramani, beautiful. I'm an attorney too, and I'm so privileged to know an attorney of your caliber, self above everything else. So what you're saying is come from a point of service, right?
Yes, because that's our how can I say? That's why we study law, Soraya. If we decide to become an attorney at law, then yes, you have to come from a point of service.
Okay, thank you. Beautiful.
I'd like to say, one thing to clarify, that direct activism has a particular important role. That does not mean that the lawyers should become silent activists. They have a direct role. They have a direct role to do direct activism, and they should do it. This is actually for the floating population who cannot or don't have the wherewithal to do direct activism. We have to find other ways of engaging them. But direct activists take the cake.
All I was trying to say was, we think that direct, as a lawyer, our activism comes in standing up in court, shouting about something, da. But a regular lawyer, not every lawyer is privileged in the way, say, I am. I'm from Colombo, from a lawyer background. I can stand up anywhere, say what I want. A lot of people don't have that privilege. They work in chambers that may not encourage that type of activism. Doesn't mean that you don't have the opportunity to be an activist. That's all I was trying to stress.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. And I heard that fully, that, no matter what you're doing, part of your time and expertise should be to serve somebody. It's not contingent on a fee, right? Yes, thank you. Venerable Tenzin, do you have a question before we go to the next?
Yes, it was most inspiring to actually listen to you, because the vibrancy and the dynamism is, really inspiring I want to get on the stand and sort of do something. But I want to just ask you, is there in contingent with your profession, how do you, in a material world, when you become an attorney, the primary expectation is that you make loads of money. I don't think many people go into to become a lawyer, with the exception of the people in the panel, the attorneys in the panel. I'm just wondering, how can you inspire your own peers, with people with such agency and capacity, to do something more than self-serving, just looking after themselves? Have you found a challenge in that, or have you sort of been able to gather people from your own profession?
Well, the New York Bar about 15 years ago placed a challenge to their members that 5% of their billable hours is dedicated to pro bono work. Okay. Everybody thought it was a joke, really. New York lawyers, they make Sri Lankan lawyers look really nice. It's all about the cash. And so the first year, maybe one or two, I mean, there was famous lawyers who always did pro bono work, but otherwise all the others, which is few of the law firms, were doing a little bit. Now I'm glad to say we have what we call the top 5 law firms in the world. They are competing among each other to provide pro bono services and to be known each year as the firm that provided the most number of hours of billable hours pro bono. So these are all perceptions. We make so much money. I mean, I am billed at some ridiculous amount an hour. And that's the knowledge that I have and all my colleagues have. And it's nothing for us. Say, if you take the 5 days of the week, it's nothing to dedicate one day for unpaid work, because in the rest of the week, we make more than, most average professionals, frankly.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Wonderful.
Ramani.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to stay with us and, please ask any questions you would like of the rest as well. Soraya, you want to say something today about activism and silent activism? I know Soraya is not a silent activist like me. We like to get out there and, make our voices heard. And sometimes it gets very tiring because we think we are shouting out there and nobody's hearing us. So maybe there is something to be said about silent activism, Soraya.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I'm just so inspired by what Ramani was sharing. Maybe it's a call on you, Ramani, to be that activist who is going to have that organization. And I know there's legal aid and all of that, but you're bringing in a whole new idea, and that's beautiful. So, so today I'm just going to talk about 3 of my favorite people, giants in nonviolent activism. And that would be Mandela, Gandhi, and Dr. King. Okay, so Gandhi was very firm on nonviolence. We're talking about specifically nonviolent activism now. So because Gandhi felt the goal of nonviolent resistance is not to defeat anybody, but to create friendship and understanding. Instead of destroying the opponent, the nonviolent resistor tries to awaken the sense of moral shame. The end is redemption and reconciliation. Now, even though Mandela was high on nonviolence, we also know he said nonviolence is a good policy when the conditions permit. So here's for us to debate that issue also. But when I look at the protests for deforestation that's happening in Sri Lanka, what we see is nonviolent resistance or nonviolent action in our midst. So that is where I know Carol is highly involved in this. We are trying to achieve social change through symbolic protests, civil disobedience, economic and political non-cooperation, satyagraha, or other methods while being nonviolent. So benefits of nonviolent. The recent quantitative research has demonstrated that nonviolent strategies are twice as effective as violent ones. Organized and disciplined nonviolence can disarm and change the world and our lives, our relationships, and our communities. So there are 9 types of generic nonviolence action described: non-resistance, active reconciliation. See if any of you fall into this. Moral resistance. I think so much of this activism happens in our homes. Selective nonviolence, passive resistance, peaceful resistance, nonviolent direct action, satyagraha, and nonviolent revolution. So these are some of the 9 ways of resisting nonviolently. Now, Gandhi, as I told you before, is one of the most famous leaders of the nonviolent movement. Gandhi called it satyagraha, which means truth force. He said satya, truth on one hand, graha means hold on to it on the other hand, satyagraha. In this doctrine, the aim of nonviolent conflict was to convert the opponent, as I said to you, to persuade him to your point of view. And rooted in this is the maxim of ahimsa. That is ahimsa. I'm told he doesn't even have a translation in English. It is escalating love. There's not one word for this. He emphasized on political tolerance and religious pluralism that holds relevant every day. And the four pillars of Gandhian philosophy was truth, nonviolence, sarvodaya, that means service of the many to the benefit of the one, and satyagraha. So we want to ask ourselves, as we see the challenges evolving in our country, in the world, what role are we playing? Are we nice potted plants, or are we doing something? You don't have to be engaged in direct action. You can do something. And I can't stress enough that we can all do something. So Dr. King, he was also inspired heavily by by Gandhi, and he said, "When I left India more convinced than ever before that non-violent resistance was the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom." So the true meaning of nonviolence, again to the King, was help the enemy see your point of view, and to hear the enemy's questions, and to know his assessment of ourselves. And this is critical, folks, because when we get into this action, we are going at a tangent. This is what I want, this is what I'm going to get, and this is what I will do. But Dr. King says, hey, apply your brakes and know his assessment of you before you proceed further. So from his view, he calls us to see the basic weakness of our own condition, and that's plenty. And he also calls us to see ourselves as mature as we grow into maturity, and to learn and go from the wisdom of the brothers whom we call the opposition. Anyone watched Gandhi, Dr. King's movie on the freedom fighters? I really urge you to do that. And non-violence doesn't come automatically. You have to train yourself. And in freedom fighters, they get groups of people, they spit onto their face and then tell them to be non-violent. And that is a lot of work. So don't think this activism is a joke. You give your soul, your DNA, your everything to this. And quickly, I have about 1.5 minutes. Mandela was also heavily influenced by Gandhi. Gandhi's origins, of course, began in Mandela's land in South Africa, where from 1893 to 1914, he was an activist and a high-profile political activist. His Satyagraha or nonviolent movement began in Johannesburg. His philosophy contributed in no small measure to bring about a peaceful transformation of South Africa and healing the destructive human divisions that have been spawned by the abhorrent practice of apartheid. So, as the years progress, one increasingly realizes the importance of friendship and human solidarity in any kind of activism that we do. And of course, as we said before, we can't stress this enough. There is so much any one of us can do. So become an activist, organize work in your community, and build solidarity. That would be the hallmark of nonviolent resistance. Thank you. Carol?
Thank you so much, Soraya. It would be very remiss of me if I didn't mention, as a woman, that in Sri Lanka, lately there have been some outspoken females in various areas. Even a young girl who challenged on a talk show some ministers and said, why aren't you looking at us? The pathetic state that we live in, while you are being fed in a canteen in the parliament, right? And I thought to myself, I mean, it's nice to see, especially these young kids who obviously are socially aware of what's going on. And that is what I think our generation, there are very, very few who are activists out there, whether it's silent activists or otherwise. And it's nice to see these younger ones who are much more, conscious about what's going on. But sadly, what I wanted to mention was, there's been so many attacks of misogyny on these females for voicing their opinion. And this is why I wanted to mention this, because Soraya, you talked about the necessity for dialogue. And we say, yes, you are free to voice your opinion, and disagree with what is being stated, but using misogyny as a tactic to shout down these females, who actually dare to speak out is, I
So
think, abhorrent. And that's what I
it,
wanted to
yeah,
mention today.
and I really want to make a point here so that we activists and community organizers, we don't give up. I think we are facing leaders who are not transformational, but transactional leaders, ruthless, very, very hard on holding on to their power, and misogyny and patriarchy are blended in. So what we women need to do, Carol, is we need to build power. If you're going to do the big work, you need big communities to support you. So and it's such a healthy beginning, to say in Sri Lanka, young generation raising their voices. And we have to ask, as older folks who have been in this game, how are we supporting? Are we standing with them? Are we referring to them? Are we writing a check to this person? Are we walking with them? We all have a role to play. So
Yeah.
I think that we are onto something big in Sri Lanka, and let us build our hopes around this.
We Wisdom Wednesdays, Soraya, we are not, we are non-political, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean we stop our voices from being heard. And I think that's important, right? We try to stay apolitical for obvious reasons, but we also have to have our voices heard. So yeah, I'm glad you clarified on that point. On this, we move on to Venerable Tenzin.
One point, Carol, one point. I think some people in the waiting room, they have to mute their mics.
Carol, you can mute everybody.
Yes, can you, yeah, I think somebody who's watching has their mic going. If you can please mute it, that would be appreciated. Yes, Venerable Tenzin, welcome, lovely to see you. I know it's middle of the night for you. Over to you. Yes, you can see your piece right now. Thank you.
I'm really sorry. I almost missed it because we had to put the clocks back, and I got the 1 hour kind of.
Oh, that was what it was.
So.
She's from Australia calling in. Thank you.
Yes. So I just want to make a point about that. I too have been very, very inspired to see very young women coming forward, as well as, women speaking up in Sri Lanka. And I would like to ask everyone and I know people have been doing that too, especially support courage in women, because it is so very hard for us women to speak up, because there is so much misogyny, so much negativity, so much venom directed towards females, particularly in Sri Lanka, but elsewhere. But heartening thing is in Australia, when I look at who has been able to change, occur a transformation in the sexual abuse cases in Australia, is single women who have been victims themselves, and now they are survivors, and they are the ones who are bringing these issues to the forefront and really taking on the patriarchy and winning. So that's really quite something. But I'm going to say a few words about spiritual activism. I think for the wimps amongst us who can't get out there and be a social activist, perhaps spiritual activism is a very fabulous way to engage, not to actually disengage. Being spiritual being doesn't mean that you actually turn your back on reality or society, because we are interconnected beings. And when you look at examples, going back over the traditions of Jesus and Buddha and all the Hindu spiritualists in India, they never disengaged. Their spiritual practices enhanced their engagement, and they wanted to better the world, bring a just, harmonious, loving society. So what to become a spiritual activist, we have to believe that a social transformation is possible to be brought about by love. So that is the most fundamental motivation in being a spiritual activist. So then it's not in any way self-serving. And I find this really quite challenging, because when we engage in any form of activity, we really we might be kidding as to finding out our real motivation, because what is presented to us on the surface, our real motivations might be quite different to what we think our motivation is. So where we really need to bring in mindfulness, introspection, vigilance about our own motivation and our own behaviors. When we are being a spiritual activist, at all times, we must act from compassion and love. We can't have any other form of motivation behind it, because it is not self-serving and it doesn't exclude one form of group in advantage of another. And it is all about the process. We can never say that the ends justify the means, because that has no place in spiritual activism. It's all about the process. The goal is as important as reaching the end result. The motivation is as important. So we have to maintain that equilibrium, maintain that state of mind. And it brings the outward actions, it marries it with the inward actions. And of course, these are not new. When we look at, particularly in the East, in Sri Lanka, we are very familiar with the philosophies that came from the religions that, spiritual practices that came from our own Buddha, Jesus, and Hindu religions, as I said. But it's being made very fashionable by a Mexican American feminist writer by coining the word spiritual activism. And she was saying that we have to understand that we are interconnected beings, that, as Selvi pointed out, we have to act like the world is an extension of ourselves. And this is no easy task, to really actually understand. It's one thing to say, oh, we are interconnected, we are, there's no duality, we are one, and it's a whole consciousness, collective consciousness. These are just motherhood statements and just words. But one thing to actually truly feel it in your heart and understand and act from a base of that is quite something else. And if we can, I think in terms of this being a spiritual activist, you have to be a bit of a rebel, because if you are going along with what is accepted in society, materialism, as Kamini was speaking about, billable hours of every incremental second kind of mentality, economic benefits, it's very hard to be a spiritual activist, because our priorities has to be different. When we are talking about such dire straits in the world, we have to turn these fundamental values and viewpoints around. And it's not just being an activist out there, whether you're a silent activist or a visible activist. I think spiritual activism just enhances whatever you do. It just makes it so much more potent. And you can actualize whatever it is that you're trying to do, because you are coming from a moral, spiritual base, and the results are much more profound. So I just want to say that the most powerful and the most beautiful, but I think most overlooked factor in this spiritual activism is actually self-love. How can we possibly extend love and compassion into the world if we are not truly embracing and loving ourselves? And I don't think many of us understand this. We are acting it's not even the East and the West. Most of us suffer from lack of self-worth, lack of self-confidence, not feeling good enough, not having enough love. So many things about ourselves. We are not good enough. And I think truly, if we spend our time just totally embracing ourselves, fully accepting from the depths of our heart, and take good care of ourselves, from that space, we can look after the world. We will never be able to harm the world, never be able to harm any creature, never be able to damage the environment, because we truly feel that connection. So I want us to take a minute to just really think about this factor. how do we totally, radically accept and love ourselves?
Oh,
So that is really all I have to say on the matter. And when we start from that point, it becomes very contagious. Without you saying or doing anything, we talked about energy. This energy field starts affecting others. Then other people start acting in the way that we act without ever having to do very much or say anything. So it's something, an experiment that we have to do ourselves. People pick up on our courage and strength, and things start transforming.
May I say something very quickly? 1 minute.
Sure.
I think I'd like to take a, I'm not going to comment on everything everyone said, but I think you really touched on something that makes a lot of sense for me. Because often people ask me, how do you do this? How do you do this work? What makes you do it? What drives you? Oh my God, so much sacrifice, all kinds of bullshit like that. And I always tell them, actually, I do it because I won't be able to sleep at night if I don't do it. It's for me that I do it. Actually, I want the world to change for me. It starts with me, self-love, as you might call it. And I say, it's like you want to know how much money you can earn and what better car you can buy next year. I want to know how many more issues am I on top of now. So I really like what you said. Thank you so much.
On that, Venerable Tenzin, can you do your 1 minute of meditation before we sign off? Before that,
Sure.
I'd like to say thank you, Ramani. I really appreciate it. So yeah, hang in there, just 1 more minute with Venerable Tenzin, and then we close.
Okay, so please make yourself comfortable and wherever you are, standing, sitting. I would just like us to take a minute to reflect on, really think about what self-love to you is. What does that mean? How does that resonate for you? Just breathing in love and joy. And you can breathe out stresses, concerns, anxieties, worries, whatever it is. Just one more time, breathing in joy, happiness, enthusiasm, vibrancy, everything that we need for activism. And breathe out, just releasing all your concerns, worries, just thinking that everything is perfect in this moment, that you have everything you need. The earth is supporting you. You have good friends and peers that love you, family. We have everything, as much as you need to eat. You are fully provided for today. Everything is perfect as it should be. And that you are perfect. You have turned up for yourself and others, just giving this time to share what you know with the motivation of making the world a better place for ourselves and others. So we can finish off by thinking that may all beings be happy and healthy and joyful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venerable Tenzin. And now we come to the end of the 28th episode of Wisdom Wednesdays. Ramani, you may not know, we started in the time of COVID lockdown, and we've been going at it, and they're very dedicated females over here. And all because I think one message I'd like to leave with you, which is what we Wisdom Wednesdays believe in, is do something and ask yourself, is it for the greater good? Because all this that we talk about activism, whether it's for women or children or the environment or whatever it is that we talk about and fight for, is it for the greater good? And if it is, then you must be engaged. If not, remember, you are also culpable, because you cannot pretend it's not happening. And whatever we want to leave for our future, the children of the future, is what we fight for today. Our next show is on the 21st of this month. Everybody will come back from good Aurudha season. So happy Aurudha to everyone out there. Good Sinhala New Year and Tamil New Year. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll catch you next time. If there are any shortcomings, please pardon us, because our techie is missing today. But yet, we've managed to successfully conclude yet another show. Ramani Muttetuagama, thank you very much for joining us today. And we hope to see you sometime in the future again. Bye, everyone.
Bye, and thank you.
Soraya.